Greetings to all the viewers and listeners of PL News Today Global. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and this is my first video. My name is Christopher Halali. I'm from DDGeopolitics, the Chris Halali Show, at Christopher Halali Official, and also Endgame. And it's a real honor to be able to contribute with Patrick Lancaster and a great team of journalists to this new channel, and to be able to bring you all the news and analysis up to date, the latest breaking news, so that you can stay better informed and that you can understand the world around. So the first thing we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the Strait of Hormuz. Now, for those who don't know, I'm an Iranian citizen. I'm a dual citizen. So Iran is my homeland as well. And I want to describe a little bit of what's going on so that you have a better understanding of the Strait of Hormuz. We know it's been in the news. We know that there's a lot going on. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, as background, we know that in late February 27, 28, there was the beginning of the war of aggression against Iran by the United States and Israel. The United States and Israel attacked Iran in the midst of negotiations that were taking place on a bilateral level between the US and Iran. It was being mediated by Oman. And once again, in less than a year, this was the second attack in the midst of negotiations that the US and Israel conducted. So this was an illegal war, unprovoked. It totally it violated all of the international norms and principles. It was a violation of the UN Charter, and it was a war of aggression, ultimately a war of choice. So we had this nearly 40 days war, or approximately 40 days war. It was called the Ramadan War. And in that war, Iran was able to use conventional as well as asymmetric tactics, including committing and finally achieving full control of the Strait of Hormuz, which they had threatened before, but many analysts thought was not possible for Iran, especially not against one, but two nuclear powers, and especially the unipolar hegemon, the United States. So this was a tremendous victory for Iran, and the projection of power in the Strait of Hormuz was something that many did not see coming, even though Iran was very honest and upfront that this would be something that Iran would use and would resort to if the U.S. was belligerent and attacked. So that's what ended up happening. And so let's go to a couple clips here and maps, which I think are really important for us to understand. First and foremost, it's important to understand the region geographically. And I think that that's something that we all must focus on. So we have here, I'm just going to pull this up for us here. Okay, here we are. So we have here a map of Eurasia and Africa. So we're going to zoom in, and you can see how large Iran is. Iran is an enormous country. It's much larger than all the Western European countries. It actually could be combined with multiple Western European countries, and still it wouldn't reach the full size. You can combine, I think it was the UK, France, Spain, into Iran, and still there would be room left. So take a look at the geography of Iran here. And then if we go down a little bit, what you end up seeing is that Iran, of course, has this critical waterway that is essential because this area, as we know, the Persian Gulf, and when I'll discuss that in a second about the naming, but the Persian Gulf area is critical because it is a major area for exporting petroleum products, that is natural resources, fossil-based fuels that are extracted through different means and then refined or sent out as crude and sent out into the international market. So, as everyone knows, from your petroleum products, you get your gasoline, your aviation fuel, your diesel, your liquefied natural gas. You get your byproducts, helium, and others. So, as well as the petrochemicals, which are important for fertilizers and you name it. So you can clearly see that Iran, there's this very narrow choke point, and this is what we know as the Strait of Hormuz, right? So it's right here. This is the Strait of Hormuz. And we'll get to that in 1 second in more detail. But first and foremost, so people understand, Iranians call the Gulf, this waterway, the Persian Gulf, which is its historic name. The United States has adopted in its military parlance the Arabian Gulf as a nod to the Arab Gulf states. You have, of course, as you can see, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and so those states are definitely involved in the naming dispute. And basically, if you hear Arabian Gulf, it tends to be somebody who's either pan-Arabist or supportive of the Arab regimes or supportive of the US and Israel. If you hear Persian Gulf, it's somebody who supports Iran's claims to the Gulf. Now, there's a very interesting historical anecdote here from Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, who was martyred, as we know, on the first day of this war of aggression. And he had a conversation with Muammar Gaddafi, who was Libya's leader, who was killed during the US and NATO-backed war against Libya. And that was a very brutal death, sadly, that he was subjected to by these NATO-backed forces. So they had a conversation over the naming issue. Now, Muammar Gaddafi was a pan-Arabist, and he told Ayatollah Khamenei, look, it's the Arabian Gulf. And Ayatollah Khamenei said, it's the Persian Gulf, but if the Arab regimes in the Gulf region overthrow their despotic monarchies and become revolutionary states, I'll be the first to call it the Arabian Gulf. And then Muammar Gaddafi asked about the Islamic Gulf, and he said, truly, if all of the states unite, then there will be no difference between Persian and Arab. It will be the Islamic Gulf. So I thought that was very interesting as something to kind of get into the mind of the perspectives of Iran's leader. So at least you all have a little bit of the geography here. So the Persian Gulf, ships will go through the Persian Gulf, through the Strait of Hormuz, and then out the Gulf of Oman, eventually getting out into the Arabian Sea, right? So what's important here to note is international law as it relates to the Strait of Hormuz. Now, why do I say that? The United States is claiming that Iran does not have the right, number one, to control the Strait of Hormuz, number two, to tax boats, to basically have a toll set up, of which Iran is asking for $2 million equivalent in yuan, in Chinese currency, renminbi. So this is also a very interesting transformation from petrodollar to petro yuan, which I think is something very unique and also part of that de-dollarization effort that many are speaking about. Let's talk about international law. It's something that I studied and something I know pretty well. So let's look at, this is the United Nations Convention for the Law of the Sea. This is the international legal architecture for the sea. So part 2 of the Law of the Sea, which is entitled Territorial Sea and Contiguous Zone, you have here Section 1, General Provisions, and Section 2, here, a little bit lower, Limits of the Territorial Sea. Let's go to Section 2, Article 3, Breadth of the Territorial Sea. Every state has the right to establish the breadth of its territorial sea up to a limit not exceeding 12 nautical miles, measured from baselines determined in accordance with this convention. So every state in the world that has a sea or that borders a sea has the right to establish a territorial sea not exceeding 12 nautical miles. So that's very important. So that's international law, by the way. That's enshrined. There's no dispute at this point for the law of the sea. Any disputes that do exist they have courts that deal with this, whether it's the International Court of Justice or special convention courts that deal with the law of the sea. Now, why is this important for the Strait of Hormuz? Well, I'll tell you this right now. The Strait of Hormuz at its most narrow point is 21 nautical miles, right? And that we have it right here. At its narrowest point between Oman and Iran, the strait is less than 21 miles. Okay, so we have the narrow point in this area here by the various islands that are there. What does that mean? It means, number one, that Iran and Oman, if they extend their territorial waters, they will allow for no international waters because, as you know, 12 plus 12 is 24. And this is saying that the narrowest point is 21, meaning that there are 3 extra nautical miles that aren't accounted for because there's no more territorial, there's no more water. That's narrow. So it's less than the 24 threshold, which means that if Iran and Oman together exercise their full territorial water rights, as is enshrined by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, therefore, they don't have to have any international waters, and both of them can agree on a bilateral basis as to how to govern the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is very interesting because the United States is claiming that Iran does not have the right. But in fact, Iran does have the right. It's enshrined in international law. And if Iran reaches an agreement with Oman, they have every right in the world to extend their territorial waters and then to charge whatever is acceptable to each of the parties, a toll or some sort of payment. And Iran has made it official via its announcements that it will share 50-50 the profits of this toll, and that will generate tens of billions of dollars a year for both Oman and Iran. So that's very important and a very important development. The other important aspect here that we should speak about is the fact that the shipping lanes have been rerouted so that way they could enter into Iranian territorial waters, and also that the Revolutionary Guard Corps, the naval branch, could deal with the traffic from the boats. So the various boats that are going back and forth through the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian military will deal with that traffic. They will check the boats and where they come from, where they're going, their loads, and ultimately there will be an agreement as to the transactions that allow the boat to pass. Okay? So far, boats have passed during the conflict from Pakistan, from Russia, from China, from India, and one from France even, because France did not participate wholeheartedly in this effort and rejected Trump's overtures to join. So that's very important to recognize here. Now, what has happened and what's transpired? Iran, as we said, closed the Strait of Hormuz and was able to invoke territorial waters. Now, one key thing here before we go on, that I want to address is important maritime states like Greece have claimed that Iran does not have the right to do this because Greece has limited itself in terms of its territorial waters to only 6 nautical miles. And the reason is that because Greece in the Aegean has so many islands and small rock formations that protrude from the sea that they can use as sort of a baseline to say that also requires the 12 nautical miles, basically these islets. So what does that mean? It means that if Greece were to fully enact what is guaranteed for it under international law, that is the law of the seas, the Aegean Sea would no longer have international much in the way of international seas, it would become, as many say, a Greek lake. And therefore, it becomes a red line for Turkey. Turkey has said that it will not allow Greece to basically turn the Aegean into a Greek lake. That would be a severe threat to Turkey's national security. So Greece has been very critical of Iran, partially because Greece cannot enact this full 12 nautical miles on its own. And that's part of the ongoing dispute between Greece and Turkey. So very interesting aside here. I want to come to a little bit of where we're at today, because I think it's very important for us to see what's going on. So we know that there is now a blockade in effect. So basically, after Islamabad, the United States and Iran did not come to an agreement. The United States rejects Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz, and to counter that, has imposed a naval blockade. And let's take a listen quickly to what's going on here. So this is from CENTCOM. We see here, this was from earlier today. United States Central Command. U.S. naval vessels are on patrol in the Gulf of Oman as CENTCOM continues to execute a U.S. blockade on ships entering and departing Iranian ports. U.S. forces are present, vigilant, and ready to ensure compliance. So here we go. This is what the U.S. Navy is playing to Iranian and other vessels.
The U.S. has announced a formal blockade of Iranian ports and coastal areas. This is illegal action. All vessels are advised to immediately return to port if leaving and discontinue transit to Iran if that is your next port of call. Do not attempt to breach the blockade. Vessels will be boarded for interdiction and seizure transiting to or from an Iranian port. Turn around and prepare to be boarded. If you do not comply with this blockade, we will use force. The whole of the United States Navy is ready to force compliance. Now,
so there you go. So the whole of the U.S. Navy is ready to enforce compliance. This is a major development. And why do I say that? I say that because international law is very clear about a blockade. Let's take a look. So first and foremost, a blockade. This is from the International Committee of the Red Cross, which does a lot in the realm of international humanitarian law. So how do they define a blockade? A blockade is an operation involving naval and air forces by which a belligerent completely prevents movements by sea from or to a port or coast belonging to or occupied by an enemy belligerent. To be mandatory, that is, for third states to be obliged to respect it, the blockade must be effective. This means that it must be maintained by a force sufficient to prevent all access to the enemy coast. The belligerent must declare the existence of the blockade. The belligerent must also specify, and the starting date, geographical limits of the blockaded territory, and time allowed to neutral vessels to leave. This declaration must be notified to all neutral powers and to the local authorities. So that's the general definition. And now we get to a much more specific definition, which is very much in line with international law, which is that a blockade is a military operation employed by belligerents to control, prevents, or blocks partially or completely. So we got that area. We got that definition part. But the second paragraph is the key here. A blockade is an act of war that is regulated by international law. I repeat that again. A blockade is an act of war that is regulated by international law, namely by the Declaration Respecting Maritime Law adopted in Paris on 16 April 1856, and by Articles 1 to 21 of the Declaration Concerning the Laws of Naval War adopted on 26 February 1909 in London. The San Remo Manual on International Law applicable to armed conflicts at sea, SRM, adopted on 12 June 1994, also provides some legal interpretations in paragraphs 67A, 93 to 104, 146F, and 153F. In order for it to be binding to third-party states, it must be effective and its existence must be officially declared along with the starting date, the territorial geographical limits, and a time provided for neutral vessels or aircrafts to be able to leave the area. So, as a method of warfare, a blockade must completely comply with international humanitarian law and customary international humanitarian law, which are applicable in both situations in both situation of international and non-international armed conflict. So an embargo is not an act of war. A blockade is an act of war. So what Trump has effectively done is an act of war. And that's really critical here because that's what many of us have been saying, but there's been a big dismissal of the fact that this is in fact an act of war. And it is. And we can go back in history and we can look at, for example, what John F. Kennedy did during the Cuban Missile Crisis when he basically blockaded Cuba to stop Soviet vessels with missiles and nuclear capabilities to enter Cuban territorial seas and to dock in Cuba and offload their cargo. So this is all part of the history. But of course, the blockade itself today, which is off the coast of Iran and Oman, is very much an act of a belligerent power, and it is an act of war, ultimately. And so that's important to note here. We also have some of the, let me pull them up here. So this is just an image that I think will help you kind of see where we're at. So we see the narrowest point, which is what Iran has there. And then we see where the US blockade is, which is a little bit further into the Gulf of Oman. So the US forces have not gone up the Strait of Hormuz. They are in the Gulf of Oman, but they are enforcing it from there. There's been a lot of information and misinformation about vessels that have been able to successfully run the blockade. As far as I know, most vessels have been turned back. There were some reports of some successes, but I think it's still too early to know fully if there have been any successes at all. A lot of vessels are turning on and off their transponders as they're navigating these waters. So it remains a complex and fluid situation, no doubt. Let's take a look as well. So here's a map. This is from the BBC of the US blockade of Iran's Gulf Coast. So you have the major ports, for example, Bandar Abbas and all the way down Chabahar, which is in Sistan, Baluchistan, right on the border of Pakistan. So this entire area has been declared basically a no-go zone for vessels that are trying to dock in Iran or leave Iranian ports. So that that blockade is in effect at this point. And Iran has in turn said that it will destroy other infrastructure for ships going to the Gulf states if things escalate. So that's important as well. And another part of the, not only the military war, but the economic war that is wreaking havoc on a lot of the, Arab states and hereditary monarchies there. So there's been also some trolling from the Iranians about this. And I thought that this was great from the Iranian consulate in Hyderabad in India, which basically said, "Will blockade your blockade, which is a blockade against our blockade," basically. So it's a blockade brinksmanship, you can say. So basically that Iran will try to circumvent the US blockade by going further into the Gulf of Oman towards the Arabian Sea to be able to transport their goods out from there. So we'll see if the capabilities will be able to produce results, or if the US naval blockade will expand further, which I think is also a real possibility that we must be prepared for. We also had a tweet from, or a Truth Social that eventually became a tweet from Donald Trump, in which he said that China is very happy that I am permanently opening the Strait of Hormuz. I am doing it for them also and the world. This situation will never happen again. They have agreed not to send weapons to Iran. President Xi will give me a big fat hug when I get there in a few weeks. We are working together smartly and very well. Doesn't that beat fighting? But remember, we are very good at fighting if we have to, far better than anyone else. So clearly the ramblings of somebody who's not so well and, not fully, I think, conscious and cognizant of what's going on around him. So that's what Donald Trump posted today. A little bit bizarre, no doubt about it. Lastly, I want us to have an opportunity to take a look at another important aspect of this, which is the economic aspect. And I want to highlight, for those who haven't seen it, Pepe Escobar made a great and important documentary on Press TV about the Golden Corridor, which is the north-south corridor, Iran-Russia trade, and also connecting to India. So it's basically Russia, Iran, India, and this corridor. So if you haven't seen this documentary, I would definitely check it out because it is connected to the Strait of Hormuz. It's connected to a lot of the economic aspects of the Strait of Hormuz, and generally to Iran's position in Eurasia and how that is being impacted by this war, but also how the changing unipolar to multipolar world is also bringing about real big transformations economically, politically, diplomatically, you name it. So, but that economic piece is really, really critical for us. So I hope that this provided everyone an opportunity to understand a little bit more the Strait of Hormuz and some of the ongoing issues around it. The key takeaways for us: number one, the Strait of Hormuz remains a red line for the United States at this point. If there's going to be a second round of talks before the ceasefire expires on the 21st of April, there's been some indication that that will happen from American and Western press. Iranian press still has not confirmed or has verified that there will indeed be a second round of negotiations. And some big sticking points besides Iran's nuclear capabilities, their ability to enrich, which is a right that they and many others consider enshrined under international law. That, of course, remains major, as well as funding for proxies. But another major aspect and a real thorn is the Strait of Hormuz and its ownership. So the question of who owns the Strait of Hormuz, is it international? Does Iran and Oman have the rights to extend their territorial waters, which they do by every legal definition under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea? They have every right to extend 12 nautical miles. If they do that, there's no more international waters crossing into the Persian Gulf or out into the Arabian Sea. And therefore, Iran and Oman can create a new architecture to handle that, to be able to enforce various rules, and also, of course, to enact a toll. Now, it's important also to recognize here that Egypt charges for the Suez Canal, Panama for the Panama Canal. This would just be another, it's not a canal, obviously, but it would be another area in the world where a country can exercise its territorial waters and also generate income from that. So clearly, Iran is in the right in doing that. A blockade, as we said, is an act of war, whereas an embargo is not. But a blockade is an act of war. It's recognized as such under international law. And therefore, Trump has really violated the ceasefire. That's also important to note. And it's clear that Israel has done so in Lebanon. But Iran has said that this is a violation of the ceasefire because there was supposed to be no, escalation. This is, of course, an escalation. As I said, it's an aggressive act. It's an act of war, and therefore the Iranians are very concerned about this, and rightfully so. They're concerned, saying, "Look, I thought we had an agreement on at least a ceasefire and the 10 points that were provided." But the Trump administration has played back and forth that they don't actually know the 10 points. They didn't see the 10 points. There was a different 10 points, and so on and so forth. So that's really important to note here. So everyone should look out at what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz over the next few days. I think it's going to be a really critical weekend. If attacks start up again, we're looking at a little bit after the weekend into the beginning of next week. If negotiations happen, we'll see if they extend the ceasefire or if there is a negotiated settlement. At this point, I can't predict anything. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. But the main thing to know is that the blockade is an act of war. The Strait of Hormuz is a red line for Iran. They will not give it up. At this point, they've taken it and they want to keep it. And the 12 nautical miles are completely enshrined, and there's nothing to it at this point. So I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope it was informational. I hope it was somehow, for those who don't know, a little bit of opening of some doors that you can hopefully go and explore. I hope that more people study about Iran, understand the situation, understand the background and the context. There's a lot of history here. It's a 6,000-plus-year-old civilization state. It's way, way older than the US and Israel combined by orders of magnitude. So I hope that you all took something from this and will continue to stay tuned to PL News Today Global. And we're going to keep bringing you as much of the latest news, the breaking news, and the important analysis that is so critical for many today. Thank you all again, and take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.